This is a quick how-to video on how to check if the tweeter or high frequency driver in your barefaced bass cab is working or not. So the worst possible way to check is with something like this old P bass with old flat wound strings on it, which even popping notes, it's quite hard to get much high end out of, but here we go. So turn the knob the other way. Now, certainly here in the room I can hear there's a bit more treble. Interesting to see how that translates through the camera mic. Now let's try another way to check it. Let's crank the treble on the amp. So we've got treble knob up, and there's a high frequency attack thing here, and you should be able to hear some hiss. And if I back it off, there is still hiss, but the hiss is lower because it's what's coming through the 12-inch driver, the 12XN. So that's another way to check. Now hopefully you may have a bass that's got a bit more brightness, so let's switch bass and grab classic bright sounding bass, the trusty Stingray. What would we do without what Leo Fender had done? So let's flatten the EQ on there, leave the EQ flat on the bass, and I should say I'm not advocating you go slapping all the time. In fact, I would suggest you don't, almost at all, and that I would argue that 99% of bass playing time that is spent on slap bass is wasted, because most people who aren't bass players don't want to hear it, and it's rarely good in the context. I mean, we will do it, but there's a quite clear difference with the knob all the way one way, and if we crank the treble on the bass, yeah, so that's testing with basses, but I would argue that the best possible way to check if a high frequency device, tweeter, or indeed mid-range driver, if you have an older barefaced cab with one of them, is working, is to connect a full range source to it and play either music or speech through it. This used to be a lot easier when things had 3.5mm jacks on, and we all had, you know, the different size 3.5mm to 1/4" leads or adapters or things like that. So here we have some voice that's going to come through. So let's try this.
Welcome to Just a Minute.
There we go. And if I turn this knob,
Hello, Sue Perkins here, and as the Minute Wars
clearly high frequency stuff is coming out of that. Let's try some music. Things with cymbals are the best way to check. So that's most music. Let's try this. Oh. There we go. You can hear it changing. So that's 3 or 4, depending on how you look at it, different ways of checking if your high frequency device isn't working. And reasons it might not be working is that you've blown it, which is quite hard to do because we have a steep crossover slope that's very well thought out. We use really good tweeters that handle plenty of power for their purpose, and there's a protection circuit in there. So it takes some abuse or bad luck to blow them. Or there could be a loose connection issue. Again, that's very rare. We use these locking fast on tabs to connect the high frequency drivers, but this is occasion. More often than not, when someone contacts me to say, I think my tweeter isn't working, we go through this process of trying to find out what's going on, and we find out that it's something else in the signal chain that's nothing to do with the barefaced cab. Classic example is simply that their bass doesn't have a lot of treble. Usually, if their bass doesn't have a lot of treble, they haven't bought a barefaced cab with a tweeter, but you know, things change, amps change, gear changes, you know, and there we go. Or sometimes they're just the unfortunate recipient of the misfortune of lending their gear to someone else, and someone else, you know, leaning a bass up against the cab with a fuzz pedal plugged in, cranked up, and you just get a massive feedback spike very quickly, tweeter blown, and you need to replace it. And I've made a video to explain how to do that if that happens, because the important thing to us is to keep these cabs running indefinitely. I'd like them to outlast me, and there's thousands upon thousands of barefaced cabs out there spread all over the world, so there's a lot of people, so you might not see them that often, but there's a lot of them out there and being gigged a lot, which is nice to know. So if there's any more questions about this, ask them in that commentsy thing below. Otherwise, I will see you next time with something more interesting. Goodbye.